welcome. This is Vital Conversations. This is just an opportunity for us to gather and to talk with one another about kind of what's happening in our churches right now and ways that we can support each other, but also ways that we can resource each other. I know that you're probably receiving, a ton of email information about resources that are coming out. Last week, we talked about, how to help people go into this digital world of online worship, Facebook Live, some other things like that. And over the next couple of weeks, every Wednesday at 11:30, we're bringing in some different resources to help us with different areas. One of the things that, I really wanted to lean into this week was, as much as we're hearing about, different digital tools and ways of connecting people, because we're not going to be meeting, face to face for some time, is I really wanted to lean into the fact of, how do we care for people? And really, this is what we do in the church is, while, digital tools, online worship, online giving, discipleship, stewardship, all those things, we're going to be unpacking. I just didn't want to get too far down this road without naming the fact that, our calling is to take care of people. And in our resourcing world, I didn't want to forget that. And I wanted to have us think together about really how not only do we take care of the people that are in our churches, but the people that, are in our communities that really need a gathering of people, really need some face-to-face support. And so one of the great resources in our annual conference is Reverend Ryan Canaday, and he is the lead pastor of Free. He's an ordained elder here serving in the Mountain Sky. And he's going to lead us in a conversation of how to support and how to walk alongside of those that are in recovery. So everybody give a big thumbs up for welcoming Ryan to our call. And Ryan, would you just start us off with, introducing yourself and telling us a little bit of why you wanted to start Free?
Sure. And thanks, Michael, for having me here. Good morning to all of you. It's good to be with you. And Michael, thank you for mentioning the topic of how do we support people in recovery now. Just this week, just in my circle, I've talked to 4 people who have relapsed. Just last night, I got the call that a buddy of mine was found dead with a needle in his arm. So it's a really important topic, especially now because we live in these weird times of social distancing and isolation. So I'll talk more about that later, but I was just reminded again last night how important this stuff really is. So a little bit of the backstory to Free, and I'm open for any questions that you all have along the way. So I assume, Michael, you'll just kind of filter those questions. Feel free to toss them out to me anytime. And I'll try to give the really short version of how we started Free. There's the long version, and then there's the short version. So I'm a recovering alcoholic. I've been sober. My last drink of alcohol was January 6th, 2013, and I got sober through the rooms of 12-step meetings. And thanks to encountering a God who was doing for me what I could not do for myself, because I tried to get sober on my own so many times. And I tried every different method. And it's worth saying in this group too that I was a pastor. I was ministering, and I could not get sober. And it was this act of crying out to God, God, how come you won't take this away from me? How come you won't take this away from me? And like I say, somewhere along the way, working at 12 steps and getting a sponsor and getting honest with other people, I got sober, but it wasn't through trying hard or self-will. It was actually through surrender. So that was in 2013. 4 years ago, so I served as a pastor at St. Luke's United Methodist Church in Highland Ranch, Colorado, for the last about 7.5 years. I just left there in February to do full-time at Free. But about 4 years ago, it was actually during Lent 4 years ago, I came clean with my congregation and let them know that I was and it was in context, but it was from the pulpit. It was in a sermon that I was giving, and let them know that I was an alcoholic in recovery. And I did that through some guidance of my sponsors, some guidance of mentors in my life. and some guidance of some good friends. So it wasn't just on a whim. And it was that scary moment, because anytime we choose to be vulnerable, it's those moments where you can't control the outcome. You don't know what this thing is going to be like. It could turn on you. So it was that moment of, what are people going to say? Is it going to be too much? Can this thing turn on me? And so what happened is that Sunday after I got home from church, and my email box was flooded, and it was so many comments from people saying, how'd you put down the bottle? I can't put down the bottle. Or my mom is struggling. My dad is struggling. My brother, sister, aunt, uncle. And it was people wanting to meet throughout the week. And that continued for months. And so I didn't know this at the time. I couldn't have articulated this at the time, but it started putting this kind of passion in me that, wow, there is a great need here in Highlands Ranch, Colorado, here in the suburbs, that we can kind of buy into. We can live into this suburban sickness. We can put on the mask because we have affluence, we have money, we have the privilege to do this, and we can hit a button on our garage and pull in, and hit another button and it can close. We can never have to connect with people, and we can hide these addictions. So this kind of passion was fueling inside of me. And it was just the summer of 2018 when my wife and I started really kicking around the idea of what would it be like to create a space for addicts, loved ones of addicts. And that's a really important category. We all come together on this. And then who we call spiritual refugees, people who feel like they've been kicked around by religion, or they don't belong in the church. They don't belong with God, which, by the way, happens to be lots of addicts and alcoholics. And so the question for us was, how can we say you belong here? And so again, a very long story short, that summer, we started just meeting in our backyard to see if there was some interest. Put together a 12-person leadership team. The first week in our backyard, we just planned a 4-week pilot session to see if people were interested in talking about issues of addiction and recovery in the church. Because in my experience, the church has some work to do around this issue. And what we found was in those 4 weeks, there was a great interest. So we started, it was like 15 of us, and 20, and then 25, and it kept growing each week. And by the 4th week, people said, well, what do we do next week? And we said, well, we don't know. We didn't think about that. This was just a 4-week thing to see if people were interested. So we took a 1-month hiatus, and we started looking for space. And we got this great space. It was a great gift that was given to us. And we started meeting weekly from there on out. Starting in October of 2018, we started meeting weekly. And we call it free because all the things that set us free, grace, compassion, love, forgiveness, these are the things that are so freely given by God. And it's a community for addicts, loved ones of addicts, and spiritual refugees. And what we like to do is break the silence of addiction. And it was really important for us to stay in that South suburban area. We didn't want to go in. People kept asking, well, don't you want to be downtown Denver? No, for us, it was really important to stay in this kind of South Denver area where the sickness it's the same everywhere, but the sickness displays itself differently. So it was real important for us to stay there. And I want to share with y'all, in the recovery community, I find this, there's a hunger for God and spirituality, unlike any other community that I've experienced. And I think it's because, in the church world, we can often play the game of, going to church is what we do. We've done it for years. It's how I grew up. And it's just the community I'm a part of. And I'm not knocking that. I think that's important for a lot of people. And I think that can even be transformative. But in the recovery community, there's the very real idea that if I'm not connected, then I'll die. So it's a life and death issue. Because if you talk to most addicts and alcoholics in recovery, they didn't do it on their own. They encountered a God or higher power who was doing for them what they could not do for themselves. So to be connected to, in the 12-step rooms, what we call a higher power, to be connected to that in a really serious and authentic way is a life and death issue. And I find that to be, I find it to be really refreshing, actually. So the BS meter is really high and at free. I can't get away with much, which is a good thing. But I want to share with you all some statistics. I share these anytime I speak with a group, just so you get a sense of kind of the demographic we're in. But the disease of addiction now affects more Americans than heart conditions, diabetes, or cancer. 23.5 million Americans suffer from drug and or alcohol addiction. And by the way, alcohol and substance abuse is higher in Denver than anywhere else in the US. In the past 11 years, overdoses have increased by 286% among 18 to 25-year-olds. Colorado drug overdoses are up in almost, and I realize there's probably people on here from other places in the conference. I'm in Colorado, of course, but Colorado drug overdoses are up in almost every county and way ahead of the national average. Opioids, it's said, will kill 52,000 Americans this year and up to 500,000 people in the next decade. And by the way, I forgot to mention this, right where Free is in Arapahoe County, overdose deaths have doubled in the last 15 years. And the last one I'll drop on you is more Americans died of a drug overdose in 2017 than any year in history. They're still coming out with 18 stuff. But 2017, more people died in that year than any year in history of a drug overdose. So that's kind of the backstory of why we started Free. We started seeing the need, and I forget who said it, but lots of people have said, go to the place where your deepest passion meets the world's greatest need. And so I have a passion for people in recovery because I'm one of them. I understand it. And God was along the way putting this kind of passion in me. And there happens to be a great need right in our own backyard.
Thanks, Ryan. I just wanted to, you kind of named a little bit already some of what people are walking through. You mentioned that, this is a life or death thing, connection. How do we as the church help people in a time of social distance? How does it affect people in recovery? Different than, we're all feeling something,
Yeah.
in this time.
Yeah. It's a great question, Michael. Last week, man, it's all the days are jumbled together, but y'all can feel me on this one. Last week when I went into Free and mentioned that, I think it was last Monday, I believe, that mentioned that we would be closing our doors to the public. We had already made the decision, like many of you, our worship was going online. We weren't going to we meet on Saturday nights for a big Saturday night gathering or worship. But we have at Free, we have lots of 12-step meeting, lots of AA groups, NA groups, other 12-step groups. And on Monday through Friday, we have a very large AA group. It had grown to about 50 people each morning. And so it was an easy decision for us to but not meet in person on Saturday nights. That's like an easy thing. It was an easy decision to postpone our book studies and other groups that we had, but to go into a 12-step and AA meeting and tell these people, hey, tomorrow we're going to be closing our doors. That was a lot heavier because I know the power of, especially being the newcomer, being new in recovery, you're already scared out of your mind. So January 7th, 2013, when I went into my first 12-step meeting, my hands are sweaty, I'm shaking. I'm asking myself, are these people going to accept me? What if they find out who I really am? What if people in this room recognize me? What if people find out I'm a pastor? You're already scared out of your mind. But yet it's the exact place I needed to be that saved my life. And I don't say that lightly. It saved my life. And so to go into this meeting of 50 people and say, hey, today's your last meeting because we've got to close our doors, there was some real fear. And people voiced that fear, like, hey, we can't close. This is saving lives. And what are we going to do for the newcomers? What are we going to do for those new in recovery? How are we going to connect? And so I think one of the things we're seeing now is the fear was very real, and there still is some fear. but all of these meetings have moved on to Zoom. So that meeting, that 9:30 meeting that I was just talking about, it was averaging about 50 people. This morning on that Zoom meeting, I just got done with it at 10:30, there was 92 people. And the comments that were coming in of people connecting afterwards, people FaceTiming afterwards, it was like, oh my goodness, everything has grown virtually. I don't know where that's going to stop. I don't know where I know something so good and real is happening right now. And I don't know where it's going to kind of pan out when all of this is over. I don't know what's going to happen, but the social distancing is, it's hard for people in recovery, because in 12-step rooms you have traditions, just like you do in many church settings. You have traditions of when at the end of the meeting, we stand up, we pray, and we hold hands together. We pass around chips or sobriety stones to mark recovery. We pass around a basket, to put money into, just like an offering plate. And so just like the church world, we had to look at these traditions and do them differently. But like everyone, I think, experiencing this, it put in a real fear of what's this going to mean if I can't face-to-face connect. And the truth is, we're figuring it out. People are figuring it out along the way. We're all doing more Zoom meetings. We're all doing more FaceTime. We're all picking up the phone more, because what we know about recovery is if you stop connecting, if you stop participating, there's a good chance, I see it happen all the time, people go back out, and many of those people die.
So you named, some high-tech ways, some low-tech ways, sharing Zoom, and at the end of the day, just making some phone calls. We talked a little bit last week about what this sort of new reality is teaching us is that the basics are the basics for a reason. That, if you don't have the capability to do Zoom or to do some of those high-tech things based upon the geography of the very big region that we're a part of, like I said, phone calls, making it, going old school, as we could call it, and just calling people, or with smartphones using FaceTime. Any other ideas of how we can connect with each other, high-tech, low-tech ways? What can churches do to kind of offer up some support for the recovery groups maybe in their community, or that used to literally be meeting in their churches?
Yeah. A few suggestions. First, I would recommend, and this is today's group all clergy? Everyone's clergy in this room? Is that right? Mostly?
No, it's mixture.
Okay. Well, clergy or lay people. Go to an AA meeting or an NA meeting. And I know for some of you that might be a little scary. Will I be accepted? And what do I say? Well, you don't have to say anything. But especially now, you can attend. There's so many open AA meetings. And when I say open, that means anyone can attend. You don't have to identify as an alcoholic or an addict. Anyone can attend. And I would encourage you virtually step into one of those. And I can provide links for that. If you go to our Facebook page or our website, there's links on there. It's one click of a button. And if you don't want to make yourself known, you can even hit your video button off. But join, at least see what the conversation is. But then I would say also make yourself known to some of these groups. If these groups were meeting in your church and they're not anymore, pick up the phone and reach out to them. Give them your verbal support. Make yourself known. Because what I know is there's lots of people in recovery that think the church is against them. They think the church won't welcome them. So especially if you're a pastor, pick up the phone and give them simply your verbal support and ask if there's anything you can do to help them during this time. I think that would go such a long way for people. And then what I would also say is, we're living in this interesting time where we can actually be creative and we can fail a lot. In fact, if we're not failing, we're doing it wrong. But this is like absolutely the time to try that thing you've always wanted to try, or be creative in your worship, be creative in small groups, whatever you're doing. It is absolutely the time to be creative, because I think the old way is I mean, we know old ways are dying, but I think now it's going to die at a more rapid pace. And for those of us that say, well, we're just going to wait until this thing goes back to normal, then we can go back to normal. I think the old ways, dead and gone, as T.I. would say. But I think if you could create space for the addicts and alcoholics in your midst, for them to speak to your congregation, I think that would go such a long way for people. It would help people who aren't familiar with the conversation of recovery and addiction. It would help. It would be a great learning opportunity for them, and it would break down the barriers. And like I said earlier, they already feel, so many of them feel like the church is against them. So what a great way to kind of break that barrier. Let them speak to the congregation. You can do that, or your small group Bible study, or invite the congregation in and invite the conversation to happen. And when we are able to meet in person, invite them to share from the pulpit. Let them speak to the congregation, so that we have this silence problem. It's getting better, but we still have this silence problem. And what I know is there are so many people in your congregation that are suffering with addiction right now, and you don't know about it because addicts are good at hiding it. We play games, and so you simply don't know about it, because how would you? But maybe starting that conversation would give them the freedom. It would give them the inspiration to start getting help. So I think it's a really important conversation to start.
As we live into a new normal, like one of the things I want to name about the old normal, a lot of times that I've seen in churches, and Ryan, I want you to speak to this, and I only have one more question, then we're going to throw it out to everybody else. So if you've got a question for Ryan, start thinking. I just want Ryan to speak to one or two more things, and then we'll have an open time of sharing. What I've seen in the past is that the church has provided a space, but it was really, really sort of I don't know if we were trying to do a good job of honoring the anonymity of the folks in the group, but really we were the ones who provided spaces, which is a good thing to do. But a lot of times there was a disconnect between the recovery groups that are using the building, between then the actual ministry of the church. And you've kind of named about how to bridge some of that. What would a new normal look like? Something that we can do now that will help us, that in the next couple of months, we create a new type of culture. I know you named a couple things, but I just wanted to name that I think we've got to break down those barriers of not just being landlords for recovery groups. That's good, right? I mean, I'm trying to walk this line of kind of naming some things that are good, but also what's the next thing we can do? Can you speak to some of that?
Yeah. What a great opportunity it would be to first go to a meeting and make yourself known, but then to ask some honest questions that might create some pain inside of us, like, hey, why don't you come here throughout the week? What keeps you from joining us in worship on Sunday? And ask that question and be prepared for their honest response, or to ask them if they would be interested in partnering in some sort of project. Maybe it's some sort of community project, some sort of way to give back to people, to start to bring them into the conversation, so that they're, because what happens most of the time is they're in the basement of the church, and lots of great things. What y'all need to realize is there are lives absolutely being saved. There are families being put back together. There are people getting their lives back in the basement of your church. And for us not to be aware of that is like a huge miss on our part. And before I went to AA, I was not aware of this, that there are literally lives being saved. The work of Jesus is being done in the basement of your church. And for us not to be aware is, again, just a great miss. So to ask them for ways, would they be interested partnering up in something? Could y'all do a coat drive together? Or I don't know, I'm just throwing out ideas, but I think the first step is to make yourself known, and that you give them their support, your support, and then be open for a conversation on what do they have against the church? What has been their experience in a traditional church setting? Do they feel welcome? Would they truly, if 50 recovering addicts and alcoholics came upstairs and sat in the sanctuary, would they be welcome? And I think that's an honest question churches have to ask ourselves. Do we right now have the atmosphere created to where they'd feel welcome?
Good word. Thank you. Tell us some of what you've been doing recently at Free, the response, and then what are some ways that we can connect with you and the work that you're doing at Free. One thing specifically that I'm curious about is, I'm going to put in a commercial for your coffee ministry. Do you ship your coffee? That's my biggest question. They have incredible coffee at Free that I want to buy some. Will you mail it to my house? That's the question I want to know. But tell us what you're doing, how we can connect with you.
Yeah. First, to answer your coffee question, yes, we're doing that on small levels right now. Our coffee operation is absolutely going to expand. For those of you that don't know, Tammy, my wife, and I started Free together. Her passion is coffee. She has 12 years experience as a coffee master in the big corporate world coffee industry. So it's been her passion for a long time. So she gets beans from all over the world. These are they're fair trade beans. She looks in, makes sure that they're ethically sourced, and we know many of the farmers where they come from. But she gets beans from all over the world, and she roasts them in our backyard. And then this is part of our revenue stream at Free. We do coffee, and we do good coffee, and we branded it with different recovery names. So we have the recovery blend, the sober AF blend, the 1210 blend, which I can tell that story another time. The Serenity blend, Upon Awakening blend. Anyway, that's expanding, but we're not there yet. But if you want some coffee, shoot me an email, shoot me a Facebook message. We'll see what we can do. So back to your question about what is Free doing. Like you all, we've moved everything virtually, so no in-person meetings. Saturday nights, we started, one of the first things we did last September was the first person we hired. His name is Danny Colella. He's our digital content director. And he has been saying for months, and this guy, he pushes me. He's become a dear friend. He gives me the hard challenges of, it's about constantly giving these, putting content online on social media. He's a Facebook Live expert. So he knows every in and out, every detail about Facebook Live. And he says, dude, we've got to be doing Facebook Live because Facebook, the algorithm is pushing it right now. They want everyone on Facebook Live. So your videos are the algorithm is way up on that. He's got all the stats to prove this. So we've been doing that. We did daily touches from day one. If you don't know what a daily touch is, on Facebook and Instagram, to engage your audience, you've got to do a post every single day. We usually do more than one post a day, but for the last year and a half, we've done at least one a day. And we've been doing online content already. So when this coronavirus hit and we had to go live stream, we had some of the back work done already. So we had already built up a big engagement with people on our Facebook page, some on our Instagram, and just our online presence. We had people began to be expecting that of us. So when we live stream on Saturday, it's been really cool. And again, I would tell you all, this is the time to get really creative, and you don't have to do worship the same way you've been doing it for years. You can actually get creative on this one. We from moment one, we wanted to make this interactive, because part of what happens in the recovery communities, they're very resistant to just having one leader. And I totally understand that I'm with that. So they need to have a voice. So in our Saturday gatherings, which moved from our backyard into this space, and we've had this great growing trajectory. Before the coronavirus hit, we were having anywhere from 110 to 140-ish people every Saturday night, which we've totally outgrown our space. So we're looking for new space now. But when we started live streaming, we wanted to keep those interactive components, and it can be really difficult. So we did Facebook Live, and Danny ran everything, our digital content director, and then we put the recorded version on YouTube. But we do celebrations and heartaches together. And in our time of celebrations, you're going to hear people say they've got 30 days sober, 6 months sober, 10 years sober. And there's other things we celebrate too, babies being born, transitions in life. But we found it to be really powerful at our Saturday night gatherings to do that with 120 other people around you, and everyone's clapping for you. So we thought, how do we keep that going when we do this live stream? And I had this fear, like people aren't going to chime in and it's not going to work. And 2 weeks ago, we just started, people kept that going. The community were chiming in with these very real and authentic engagements, and the same with our heartaches. And when we do heartaches, people aren't just sharing the minor things in life. They're sharing their brother who just was found dead of an overdose. They're sharing how their family is falling apart because they can't get their stuff together and get sober. And they're sharing how addiction is breaking up the family next door, whatever it is. And it can be really intense stuff. And I thought, man, what if online no one shares? But what we found is the community came to get together, and they had the same engagement online that we had in person. And what we also found was there's this huge group of people that wanted to see what free was about and experience it, because they could just hear people talk about it, but they couldn't come on a Saturday night, or they had fear about Saturday night. So that group has been tuning in on Saturday nights on our live stream process. And we always take time. We have a storyteller every week. We've done that since day one of free. I have someone come in and tell their story around addiction and recovery tied in with that week's topic. And so I always allow people to ask them questions, ask me questions after the sermon. And so what we've done for our online experience is we just call that a check-in time. And I'll literally go through and read the comments. Same as what we do on celebrations and heartaches. I'll read those comments and we'll celebrate those together. And so we found a bigger audience, people from all over the country, and have been tuning in on Saturday night, our live one, which was a scary thing to start. But we had, just last week, we had 3,200 people watch that service, and we had a huge engagement. And the first week it was 2,800. And so we don't know where that number is going to pan out, but I've been getting messages all week. Hey, I stumbled on your page. Thank you for that service. That's such a cool thing you guys are doing. How can I get involved? And so I was just on a call this morning from a guy from New York City. He wants to be involved in free. And there's actually now, the coronavirus forced us into this, but there's actually now ways to engage online. And it's forcing us into this new way. And I think there is so much good in the new way that, again, if I say, well, I just want to wait for this thing to pass and we can gather again in person, we'll be missing something really profound that's happening.
Thanks, Ryan. Friends, what are your questions? We've got a small enough workable group that you can go ahead and unmute yourself and fire away, ask Ryan. If you feel more comfortable just kind of putting in the chat box, that's cool too. We'll monitor that. But this is your time. What questions do you have? Whether something Free's doing or just anything that's on your mind, anything that Ryan shared already, go ahead and let's have a conversation.
I'm Deborah Upton from Center and Swatch in the San Luis Valley. And when I got here, I came from an area where we had several AA groups and Al-Anon groups that met in the church in Laplace and Louisiana. And so when I came here, I noticed we have what's called a crossroads, which is mandated by the courts group that meets here. And it was full of people. And so I began asking about AA groups here in this particular town, and because the need was obvious. And I could never get any. It took me almost a year. I guess it was God's timing. And some folks contacted me from Del Nor, and one of my members I know is an alcoholic. In fact, he was have the Crossroads things, but it was trying to produce a space that would be that I could minister or have ministry for this particular person because he kept relapsing. And so we started back in November, and it's still pretty much just this member of my church and the leader. And I guess you kind of mentioned it before, the anonymity, people thinking, oh, and I've pronounced this, whether or not there's a legal name for it or not, as an open AA meeting. But there seems to be some sort of like unwritten stigma, and I don't know. And the leader and I have been talking, and I'm going to send him the link to this once it's up on the website, what we can do. And maybe the virtual chat room will be the best place for this to actually grow and be, because I don't know why. It just feels like I'm on a treadmill, and we're not really getting very much far. But I've always said, if we only started this for this particular member of the church, then it was worth starting. But according to the history, this church was this church that started AA in the San Luis Valley, and why it stopped, nobody seems to know. So I have advice, looking for advice or suggestions, or.
Yeah, I think if I understand your question, it's kind of around anonymity. Is that right?
Well, that's what I think people seem to be thinking in the church, that, oh, well, we're not supposed to know who these folks are or what have you. And I guess because it's a small enough town, the folks that come to this Crossroads court mandated thing kind of feel like, well, no, we don't want to come someplace where somebody will know who we are. I don't know. I'm guessing, because usually they're very polite to me. I try to interact with them. I've invited them to things for the church, especially like dinners and things. And I haven't gotten any response yet. But it doesn't mean I'm going to stop trying. But I don't know what the problem is for them to actually try to come to a meeting or something. So I'm thinking that because we're in the times we are at right now, the virtual thing may be what can reach them. But I don't know how. I know how to set up a Zoom and so forth, but I'm looking for suggestions that Ryan might have for me to give to Mike, who, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said that, to give to the leader of the group, because he's an older man, and so a lot of the techie stuff I know will have to come from me. But any suggestions for trying to get this group growing?
I guess I would say just to be really honest, maybe, and say, call this gentleman and say, hey, I'm a pastor here. I recognize addiction is a major problem in our country, in our area, that people are suffering with it. People are dying from it. I don't know much about it. I think for people to start there, rather than say, well, here's what I do know about it, say, if you don't have experience in that, just own it and say, I don't have much experience with this, but I want to learn. I want to know how I can be engaged in this conversation. My guess is he would be very open if we come from a starting place of humility, and not, I'm going to teach you something, but I recognize you have, and I would say this for all church people, the addicts and alcoholics in your midst, they have something great to teach you if we're willing to hear it, if we can take the time and listen. Because in my experience, they have such this authentic longing for spiritual connection. And they've found something, if they've worked these 12 steps, they've found this, something that has so much transformed their life. And so we have something to learn from that. But I think I would start there.
And that's what I did.
Yeah. And then it's in God's hands. And yeah. I don't know that there's much more to do other than just try to start the conversation, which you've done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I usually, as an observer, and learn a lot from these meetings because I don't have that experience. So it's been very helpful for me. But for the text thing, is there a problem with me setting up the Zoom thing and letting this gentleman run the thing and maybe
Yeah. You'll want to be very careful. So in AA, they have what's called we have 12 steps and 12 traditions, and each group must be self-sustaining. So churches often want to be helpful and they want to provide money or say, hey, you can have free rent here. AA groups actually can't do that because of our traditions. So you'll again want to consult with them and say maybe something like, hey, I'm aware of your traditions, so I don't want to cross any boundaries.
Gotcha.
But it's what keeps AA healthy. It's those 12 traditions. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Great question.
I got a question for you, Ryan. I was always under the assumption for a long time that addicts could relapse when things were really shitty, like when something horrible happened. And talking to a number of folks, they said, just as many times when things are going fantastic, that's when there can be that relapse. There can be that sense of, I don't need it as much anymore. Things are going great. Your whole thing is exploding in ways that the church almost can't even comprehend. I mean, you're drawing more people than Sunrise and St. Andrew and St. Luke's together in one on your first crack. So, I mean, it's really hard to comprehend that kind of sort of J-curve growth. And which leads me to my question, how are you, man? Like, how are you? This is an awful lot to maintain, your sobriety and build this thing and be in the middle of a pandemic. And what do you have? You have like 12, 15 kids in the house now? I forget.
We have four.
How are you balancing that? And I think that probably goes beyond just the recovery community. It's for a lot of us probably in the room, but you especially. How's it going?
Yeah, man, thanks for the question, Jerry. I would be lying if I said this stuff wasn't hard. I shared on Facebook yesterday that I woke up yesterday and I kind of had this feeling of despair and despair says this is just the way it is and nothing's ever going to change. And it was like, oh my goodness, you mean another day with being in the house? I love my family, but my goodness, being in a house all day with 4 kids, and our house isn't huge. Like it can feel chaotic. One of the things I love about the 12 steps is, and I'm not even a real huggy guy, they've taught me how to hug and to have that personal interaction, people checking up on you in person, really important. So to wake up yesterday morning and think, man, another day of not seeing people, it felt dark to me. So what I've learned in recovery is I have tools now, and I've got to learn to use those tools. I can't know I have the tools and then not be willing to use them. So I picked up the phone and I FaceTime my sponsor. And then I jumped on a Zoom meeting with 70 people, and I had to get out my gratitude list and write that. Here's what I do have, and I have a lot. My life is good. So 2 hours into that thing, I went from despair to no, Ryan, your life is really good, and you have to remember that. We're not being asked to do a lot, but we are being asked to do something, and it's just so up and down for me. It's kind of like, when my brother was killed, my brother died of this disease of addiction back in 2002. He was 21, I was 18. The grief process was like this. And sometimes I would wake up feeling down and I couldn't figure out why I was feeling down, or I'd get this sudden kind of burst of joy, and then I'd feel guilty for having that joy. And Jerry, I know your brother died too, so I know you can probably relate to a lot of this, but that's how this kind of social distancing thing, and it's not just the social distancing, it's our worlds have been turned, and we're trying to figure out what this new thing looks like. And now my wife goes from, we did free together. Now we're together having to be teachers to our kids, and it is stressful. Our emails we've gotten from teachers are like 3 pages long each day. And so it's these kind of waves that come and go. And I've learned to just be honest with those waves and say, yeah, this Yeah, this is normal. Yep, despair came again. Oh, I know what this feels like. Yep, I know how to treat you. Oh, joy is here. Yeah, I get to go sit outside on the patio with my kids and be in the sun. Okay, yeah, I know what this feels like. This is good. But in recovery, we kind of learn to stay on that line of serenity and not get too high, and not get either too high or too low is a dangerous place for Ryan to be. That's what I've learned.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Other questions? Go ahead and ask away.
I got to jump off to prep for another Zoom meeting in about 10 minutes. So we'll see you. Thanks, Ryan. That was super helpful. You're killing it. We appreciate you sharing your stuff. Thank you.
Thanks, Jerry.
Yep.
Any other questions or thoughts for the good of the order, friends? All right, I just wanted to express my deep appreciation for Ryan taking some time to talk with us, really about some deep stuff, how to care for ourselves, how to care for one another, how to care for the people in our churches and in our communities. And I was gonna, just kind of follow up and say, if there's any type of resourcing or help or support that you need, we're gonna share some of Free's information, but also, if you want to email vitality@mtnskyumc.org. We at the conference level want to support you in any way that we can. We can pray for you. We can connect you with some people, or, anything that we can do. We want to make sure that we can support you. So reach out to us. We'll be sending out some links throughout the conference for people to watch this, but also to get some of these resources. But thanks for your time today to be on this conversation. Ryan, I just want to throw it back to you. Give us a final word. And if you'd be willing, would you pray for us? Pray us out?
Yeah, I would love to pray for us. And the final word I would leave is keep on connecting. That is not just for people in recovery. I think that's for all of us. And, sometimes we refer to the phone as the 1,000-pound boulder. It's hard to pick up the phone and say, I'm struggling and I need help, or I need to vent, or I need to get honest with my feelings and what's going on in the interiors. But in my experience, when I do that, God uses it in these really profound ways to all of a sudden make things just a bit lighter. So keep connecting, keep reaching out, and take care of one another. All right, I would love to pray for us. Let's pray. God, we give you thanks for this day, for this gathering of people, for ways to connect in a world